of you know me, actually, already. And I've been here a little longer than 3 years now, so and although we didn't introduce her, this is Snoopy. Most of you have met her. So she's gonna be hanging out for a little bit, and she'll like figure out I'm not going anywhere. She'll lay down. So anyway, today we're gonna talk about resilience. This is a really important topic to me. It's actually what I based my dissertation on, and we'll talk a little bit about why and what it is and how we can instill it in our patients. Excuse our okay. So first thing I'm going to cover is what is resilience. What does it look like? Whether as a resilient person they're victims or survivors, what the survivor identity looks like, the trauma population, which usually is the population we identify with having resilience, but I think that there are a lot of populations, especially ones that we work with, that can have a resilient spirit or a resilient manner about them, especially with patients who are dealing with substance abuse. We will talk about how we help our patients develop resilience, and then how we can personally develop resilience. I also included handouts. So if you've got a folder, there's some handouts in there that you can use for yourself, for patients, with kids, physically, whatever. So first thing is I love definitions. Resilience in so many words, so it's a noun, and it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or essentially like toughness. Some people call it like hardiness. As far as the way I look at resilience, or one of the things, at least for me, that's important is how people manage through stress, or how people manage through a difficult situation on a regular basis, on an everyday basis. It's the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. So in spite of or regardless of whatever has taken place. It's also an ability to recover or adjust from a misfortune or change. So we have those happening on a near daily basis, and we also have that both from a large level, overall world, country, but also at a more personal level, so family, friends. Things happen to us every day where we are sort of tested. And so resilience is how we use what is being thrown at us and how we essentially interpret it, how we how we digest it, and then how we react to it. Psychological resilience is defined as the person's identity to properly adapt to stress and adversity. So it can come, like I said, from family or relationship problems, health problems, workplace, financial problems, among others. And in other words, it's just the ability to bounce back from a negative experience. I also left in here community resilience, because this is something that I looked at most specifically in my dissertation, which was the ability to not only survive, but to thrive, what is very important, in spite of a loss on a broad spectrum of systems, where resources and situations are at their worst, in their worst state. So in this case, I was looking directly at a natural or man-made disaster at a national, state, and local level. Hit all levels for Katrina. So just to give you a little bit of background, that's what I studied. I studied Hurricane Katrina. I looked at that situation most specifically from two different places. Specifically New Orleans, which technically experienced what they would consider a man-made disaster, so it was more flooding and levee breaks, versus Mississippi, who experienced wind, rain, big hurricane, and their stuff was like wiped away, just gone. So the way that they experienced it in both cases was detrimental to their daily lives and experience. They were a lot of times stuck, they were homeless, they were, in situations that posed great peril, and they had to, in some cases, overcome that. They had to move through it. They had to survive in spite of it. They had to, in some cases, escape it. That was about a little over 11 years ago now, But we're, if we're paying attention nationally at the time, it was a big deal. It was really hard to watch. It was hard to see our population or our Americans experiencing something like this and not seeing like the help that they were getting. That's at least something that really touched me. And I'm reminded every time we have like a large scale disaster. So obviously we had Hurricane Matthew this last week. Our sites, we have 50 sites, they were relatively unaffected, but there were places that were affected. And looking at that, how a community can come together is basically how I started this research, and it's always been a passion of mine. I also want to just touch on Freud, because I think that coming from this perspective, a lot of times we want to look at something really therapeutically, but he looked at it as an ability to persevere through traumatic situations and use resilience as a psychological barrier against harm. The immediacy and the severity of the situation is caused and prevents a person from becoming overwhelmed. So basically it's how we deal to avoid anxiety. And sometimes we do this automatically without knowing. If we're somebody who something happens to, we just power through. This is essentially what part of resilience is. So some of you may already be fairly resilient people. That's a good thing. If you're not, and your employees here, I want you to look at my self-care presentation that will be coming out in the global training in a couple of weeks, because it talks about that. Part of the reason I got interested in resilience and most interested in Katrina was in working in a treatment facility. I met this woman who was a counselor. Her name was Anise. And she had moved her whole family after the hurricane to California with no job, no stuff, nothing, basically the car and the clothes on their backs, and started her new life there. And she would tell her story during group sessions, and it was like a women's group, and really just talking about how she made it through, and her really traumatic story about what the hurricane was for her, and her feelings about wanting to go back was what got me interested in studying this phenomenon, as well as studying the experience that she had. So I think that this is something that our patients also experience too. Most of them come here with a story, and if they're in the right frame of mind, in the right mindset, they're looking to ideally have a resilient experience here, have an experience of recovery here, and take whatever they've learned here and go home with it. So resilience is really important, and fostering it in our population is really key. So the first thing that is really important that I as far as what I looked at, was perspective. So resilience isn't just one man alone doing it, saying, I can do it. Usually comes from a community setting. It comes from how you lived and learned in your family, how your family interacted with their neighborhood or their community, how that community associated overall. So using that, my dissertation took a Bronfenbrenner perspective, which was to look at both nature and nurture and how we form systems to rely on each other. So for the Bronfenbrenner perspective, it's usually the person or microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem. The microsystem and mesosystems are the systems that work mostly together. So the person, their family, their friends, their neighborhood, their school, their work. You guys are part of her microsystem and mesosystem. So you all interact in that. If she has a child, her child's teacher is part of her mesosystem. So you guys have to, in some ways, kind of depend on each other. If any of you have said, hey, watch my stuff, well, I gotta go do this, that's you depending on somebody else for something. Even if it's minimal, short 2-5 minute thing, it's you interacting with each other. And that's kind of what community resilience is meant to build, and what part of being one of these systems is about. So it uses the influence of outside sources combined with internal processes, what you do internally versus who you surround yourself with externally, to determine how you will respond and cope to a situation. So, for example, my little dog here, if you've ever noticed me rolling around with her, it's not just because she likes to roll around. Most people would like this, actually. You've made it clear. But it's because she can't walk. So part of my microsystem and mesosystem is people that help me to be able to facilitate her coming to work, staying home, so that I can get a break, so that I can take her places. So all of that community it's what I do, which is my internal purpose to keep her as happy as possible, because I like her face. And part of everybody else, involving everyone else in that process. So if I ever say, hey, can you watch her while I go to the bathroom? You're now part of my system, so thank you. But it's a perfect and very simple example of what we all do that we don't even realize that we do, but is necessary for us to be and continue to be resilient people. So families are going to come together and ideally use or overcome an obstacle together. One of the really great examples in the storm, and there weren't many, honestly. Well, actually, that's not true. There were many, but they didn't often get publicized, let's put it that way. So one example in the storm was there was a parish called the Plaquemines Parish. And we heard, I know it was 10 years ago, but with the storm, specifically with Katrina, it was really big about evacuate. But a lot of places couldn't. People were not in a position where they were able to, financially, or they didn't have cars or whatever the situation may be. So this parish actually used all of their school buses to get everybody out. So that was organization on a community level, organization from a neighborhood level and make sure that everybody was safe, organization on a family level to let each other know. So it encompasses more than one system, and that's what's sort of necessary to help at least a community to be resilient. A person to be resilient, well, okay, if I had my own car, great, I want to get the heck out of here. But if my neighbor didn't have a car, you want to take them with you. Okay, so now you've involved a system. Now you're helping others. Now you're both resilient together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. As I say here, a person and the strengths and weaknesses he or she can develop are dependent upon learning theory and are tied both to nature and nurture. So part of it is how your family is used to, or how you sort of encompass things. And I would say probably mostly as mental health professionals, you're used to helping others, right? So you're not going to be everyone for themselves kind of a person. You probably are going to be someone who would stop and help someone along if you saw that they needed it, ideally. Are there times when we don't? Sure. Is it okay? Yes. But for the most part, if, over the spectrum, if we're seeing something wrong and we're wanting to right it, this is under our normal process, and so it means that you inherently are people that are going to push towards resilience. Functions of resilience include assimilation and taking stock. So something has happened, something bad has happened. This happens probably on a regular basis here. We have situations where maybe a patient has gotten out of control or event has happened at a house where we're having to deal with it. And our immediate reaction is, oh crap, what happens now? Are they going to leave? Are they not going to leave? What's going to happen? There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. But so the first thing is taking stock. Okay, so what actually happened? That's what we, as resilient people, do. We want to kind of see, all right, so let's hold on before we make any rash decisions. Let's see what we need to do here. Next is looking for alternative or positive coping. So this is finding the bright side of things. Well, at least this didn't happen. Well, at least everyone's relatively safe. Nobody died. Nobody this, or whatever the situation may be. So we try and find kind of the positive entity to move and gravitate towards. And we are usually trying to be resistance against giving up, or resistant to giving up. So we want to try and push to a solution that isn't just, okay, well, we have to do this, we have to kick them out, we have to, whatever the situation may be, depending obviously on the situation. But we really try and look for solutions. It is a more solution-focused model. We are then going to, as I said, find solutions. So finding alternatives. What could be? I think we do this on a regular basis and we don't even realize it. So we have a patient who has relapsed. It's their first relapse. Is that the end of the world? No. It happens a lot. Okay, so what are we going to do? All right, well, it's their first relapse and they really want to be here, but such and such happened and so was involved, so we're going to give them another chance. Great. Okay. We've come to where our solution is there. Say it's their second relapse. Then it's alternative solutions. So maybe now we have to transfer him. All right, well, where are we going to transfer him? Well, he can't go here because his girlfriend's there. All right, well, can he go to this other place? So we start to look for alternatives on how we can make something work so the patient ideally is getting what they need to get. You guys do that in your regular life too. If something happens that's negative, you got to course correct, right? The last thing is rebuilding, recovery, and moving forward. So basically how we kind of put an end to whatever that situation is and move past it. I think this is where a lot of people maybe struggle because they get caught in the loop of what had happened and not being able to sort of get past. I heard somebody say one time, I thought it was hilarious, people got to build a bridge and get over it. Right? We have to be able to move forward. You can't rear view everything that happens in your life. To look at it for what you could have been different, sure, but then we have to move forward on what we are going to do different and stop looking in the rearview mirror. Current research on resilience points to personal, biological, and psychological characteristics such as resolution and inner strength as being critical to avoiding and overcoming psychological disorders. So, it's not everybody, but ideally, having some sort of internal hardiness of being able to sort of like pick ourselves up by our bootstraps is what helps us to sort of maintain that order. Now, is that lasting? Not always. Sometimes we end up, still struggling through something, and that's normal and it's okay. But a lot of people, if they have either an internal process as well as external support, are maybe a little less likely to end up with some of the common disorders associated with a traumatic situation. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we're going to talk about victim versus survivor. I'm going to tell you first and foremost, most people like the word survivor. It's like Beyonce and Destiny's Child. Everyone wants to be a survivor. Nobody wants to be a victim. But is that true? Maybe not always. There are some patients, I think, that we have that sometimes are perpetual victims, right? So the victim experience is feelings of hopelessness, vulnerability, fragility, self-pity and numbness, defeat, shame, self-hatred, and discouragement. So we know these people, right? People show up to our door every day who have that. I think that what's sometimes difficult is when a patient is in sort of a victim mode, that's what they're used to. Maybe they're an identified patient in their family, but it's, me, this is what happened to me, how do I get over it, or me, right? So characteristics of a resilient person relatively are the opposite. So the ability to adapt to a change process or change environment, which change is hard for everybody. Let's just be honest. Any kind of change, good and bad, and in this field, at this company, sometimes we deal with a lot of it. But it's important that we know how to push through it and how to maybe change what the dialogue is. A lot of this may seem similar to like motivational interviewing. There is a lot of very similar takeaways in it, in that to be able to be fluid, flexible, is really important in the work you do and in being able to move past a situation that's negative. The ability to have acceptance of certain circumstances, depend on others for social support, and depend on some fashion to your community is how we often are able to really sustain resilience on a regular basis. One of the really great examples that I had during my experience of interviewing people for my dissertation was of this woman who had just moved from more inner Mississippi to Long Beach, Mississippi, which is right by the ocean. And she lived there literally 3-4 days when the hurricane was like starting to come. And what you'll hear commonly with people on that coast who are in the hurricane belt is, we're evacuated, nothing happens, we go back. We're evacuated, nothing happens, we go back. And it becomes a cycle. And people get sort of deadened to the idea of the danger, to the risk. So with Katrina, it was sort of no different. You know, she had just moved, she was not trying to get evacuated. She had just gotten there, her and her cat were not going. And the policeman said to her, okay, well, please write your social security number somewhere so that when we find your body, we will know how to identify you. Well, that got her going. So she ended up evacuating. Now, the terrible thing is that, well, I guess actually the good news in this case is that her home was completely destroyed. Everything was gone. And she didn't have renter's insurance. She just like moved there, so like everything was gone. Which is really a terrible situation. But the good thing is she evacuated and that she had people to depend on. So what's unique about her, that actually kind of fits with who our population is that she had been 7 years sober. So here's somebody who has experienced abject loss, had lost everything, and obviously was then having to deal with the idea of what her sobriety was going to be. Was she going to end up drinking? Was she going to give up? And one of the things that was really important for her was to keep that sobriety. So where many of the people that she had been friends with or had gone to AA meetings with had, essentially given up, gone to the local bar, she drove 56 miles to Tupelo, Mississippi, home of Elvis Presley, and went to a meeting. And that is resilience. That is someone who's choosing an alternative to what is the worst day of your life. All your stuff is gone. Like, we deal with earthquakes here. This is why I will always live in California, because earthquakes happen for a minute and it's done. Sure, there might be a lot of damage, but it's finished. It's not hours and hours and hours upon, experiencing a situation. And then you have all the cleanup. So here, this person, when she went back to where her home had been, the only way she knew it was there was she lived near a Waffle House, and they have black and yellow flooring, and she could see some of the tiles skittered around. That was it. So all of her stuff was gone. And I think that, for someone like me who'd never experienced anything like that, I lived during 9/4 earthquake, but beyond that, there wasn't a lot of huge things that had happened in my life that were similar to that. That's a huge experience. It's a huge loss to have to deal with that she came back from, and she had a really positive story from. What I found going across all of the people that I spoke with was that they had really great stories like this. Even if they had tough situations or things that seemed insurmountable, they survived and they pushed through. And I think that is one of the hallmarks of people in that area. But I also think that it's really a good thing for us to look at, that at your worst day, if you can try and push through and help yourself, help somebody else, that really helps empower you and empowers you for the future. Does that make sense? So I like to talk about her, and I like to talk about some of the other people just because I think, sometimes we feel like we live in a bubble of substance abuse, of mental health, and we forget that there are, sometimes people every day having to just kind of make it through, figure things out. And so it's a good reminder. And it's good for us too, because I think there are days when we don't want to really get up and go. We want to stay in bed a little bit. And I think it is being resilient and a resilient internal structure that helps us to sometimes get through things. Cost of trauma. So of course, there are people who do struggle a little more and perhaps as a result end up with a psychological disorder. Could be for a short period or a long period of time. But I feel like it's important to talk about it because with resilience, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not. It just means that maybe it's taking its toll a little more. That things happen that were beyond their scope. As mentioned before, that internal hardiness, if you don't have the framework psychologically to be able to handle something, that's not necessarily your fault. It sort of is what it is if that's how you were built up. But how do we then deal with it? So a couple of disorders come to mind. Obviously, acute stress disorder is the first and most major one that lasts for the first 4 weeks after an immediate situation. Then we go to post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder. That would be anytime 30 days or longer. That can last a certain period of time. And a lot of times people have these reactions without even necessarily knowing what it is, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not resilient people. Perfect example, I was in a car accident, and that accident resulted, it was a man being hit. But for the first maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't necessarily want to drive that car that he hit me in, and I didn't want to drive that direction that I'd been hit. It wasn't that I necessarily qualified all the way for PTSD. I maybe could have had some acute stress, maybe generalized anxiety, but it was just, one situation, and it took me a little bit of time to sort of recalibrate. So these are part of sometimes people's recalibration tactics and needs. So if somebody has post-traumatic stress or they've experienced a lot of complex trauma, part of being a helpful therapist would be to help them sustain resilience or help them build resilience in themselves, help them learn how to become resilient. So these are things that you guys can do. Commonly, I think this is used a lot with panic disorder, depending on what the panic disorder, whatever the original, there's a word. Stressor, thank you. That wasn't the word I was thinking of, but that'll work. Whatever the original stressor was that resulted in the development of the disorder, I think that is something that as we move along, we can help to sustain ourselves. I think in this case, our patients often struggle with how to be resilient, how to even look on the bright side of things. Maybe some of them aren't even at a point where they can think about the word resilience or even know what the word resilience means. So understanding the patient struggle and what pieces are missing for them is often important. This can be done by looking at how they sort of conceptualize themselves in their situation. So, for example, are they looking at their time here as just waiting or biding time until they can get out, and then when they get out, what's the plan? Are they thinking about who can be supportive to them in the recovery, whether it be mental health or substance abuse, or are they thinking about what all the obstacles they're going to have to face when they get home? What happens when your patients leave? Are they excited and hopeful, or are they ready to get out, but you're pretty sure they're going to relapse? You know what I mean? So it's talking to them about that up front so that we can get an idea of where they are and if they even can think about themselves as being resilient people. I think also what happens here is that if you have any patients that have dealt with substance abuse for a long period of time and they had a lot of loss surrounding it, it can make it even harder because they see themselves, but they often don't see whatever the situation was in relation to them. So for example, you have a patient who lost a friend, lost a relative to substance abuse, but they still use, right? Often is baffling because you're like, you know something. Like, there's been people around you. Maybe they died in front of you. Maybe you were there with them. And still you use. And it's hard to sort of reconcile the two. And so I think that this is something that's really important for us to think about and process with our patients. Like, how do they see themselves in relation to the situation with others? Do they have survivor skills? This is often something that comes up. When others aren't lucky, or I hate to use the word lucky, but aren't so lucky, or someone experiences a situation where the person right next to them dies unexpectedly or expectedly, you know, people don't often know how to deal with that. A really good example, I don't know how aware you guys were, but at our Rancho San Diego site, we lost our training director. She died unexpectedly. So, can you imagine, in a setting like this, they were just like most of you in that setting, and the next day your training director's gone. She just died unexpectedly. How do you process what emotions come about with something like that happening? So you know, initially you start to think, well, you know, thank God it wasn't at my site. That's a normal stress reaction, right? That's normal, like, oh, glad it wasn't us. You know, and then people feel guilty, like, well, what a horrible thing to say. Like, I'm happy that it didn't happen to us, but I'm glad it happened to them. Like, you know what I mean? So sometimes we twist around just being glad that we're all okay. And we need to know that that happens, and we need to work with that. And we need to work with that with patients, because they do the same thing. If we do it, they definitely do it. They do it on a lesser level. So, does that make sense so far? Any questions I've answered so far? Hope I'm going. All right. So it's important to look at how common it is, especially with the substance abuse population, that they're going to have a lot of loss. They're going to have some experiences, definitely some trauma, especially some of the women, if they had participated in things that maybe they didn't know about, weren't conscious of during their use and abuse, and that things happen that they don't know how to process. They don't sometimes even know how to start to talk about it. So the idea that you can be resilient and still talk about it, I think sometimes it feels like two different foreign ideas. But we have to join them together, because it's important to sort of bring that to mind. It's sort of the elephant in the room. You know, if we're talking about all the things that happened except for the death of someone's really good friend, shouldn't we be talking about that, right? It's important to bring that to consciousness and start to process it as well. There's also the issue that we don't like to talk about of victim syndrome. So these are those folks that are the perpetual victims. We have them, they come here, maybe even some, you know, you cross them in your life, they're at your house, who knows? But these are the people that, you know, doesn't matter what happens, it's always someone else's fault. They're always the victim. This always happens to them. And they'll use those words. This always happens to me, fill in the blank. You know, they're here among, not maybe among us, but they're here among us collectively all the time. So I like to think of them as sort of like the Eeyore syndrome. You know, if they didn't have bad luck, they wouldn't have any at all. Just kind of like everything's like, oh bother, you know, my poor life, you know. And this is common with certain populations. It's actually part of their both personality and the way they process with others. So it's a learned behavior, it could be also internal, but I think that they have a role in it. So just like you do, people can either put on the coat of the victim or put on the coat of the survivor. So we want to try and push more putting on the coat of the survivor. Because the victim coat, usually pretty heavy, usually doesn't fit very well, and very often doesn't usually get anything resolved. You know, someone's once a victim, always a victim, sort of, you know, looking through that. I like to look at things kind of more, I'm a much more optimistic person just in general, which you'll notice. But, you know, the whole thing, the glass half full, the glass half empty. How about there's a glass? Yay. So that's, I think, where we can be resilient. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be half empty, it doesn't have to be full. There's a glass. How about that? You know? I used to say, for those of you who remember Vanilla Ice, so there's something called Starfield's Law, which is anything that's going to be good, will happen, and that's great. Then there's the other law, Murphy's Law, that anything that's bad, could happen, will happen. Well, I employ Vanilla Ice's law. If there was a problem, you'll all solve it, right? Yeah, you can quote me on that. So I think it's important, you know, this is sort of my way of being resilient. You know, I like to use humor and kind of funny, and then I walk around with a dog that everyone can pet. So that's, you know, that's the way in which some of us really interact and work to be resilient. But there are ways to really inhabit it in our patient and look at, you know, those people who are inherently negative and try and push them closer to the middle, you know, doing some of the stuff that I just did, push them that direction. The fun part, probably the most interesting part for you guys. How can we help patients develop resilience? So, I provided you handouts, but we're going to talk about them in a second. First and foremost, optimism, focusing on strength development. So, yeah, everything sucks and life's really hard, but you've got good hair. Or then you die. You could go dour, sure, Murphy's Law. You've got good hair, Starfield's Law. You're here, cup. Right? So there is a way to focus on strength. So focusing on being more positive oriented. Okay, so great. Yeah, things are hard. You're really, really having trouble with maybe having symptoms today, or detoxing, or, you know, you're feeling like crap, but you're alive. Maybe your favorite song came on in the morning, you danced for like 3 minutes, you know, stuff, little things like that. It doesn't have to be huge stuff. We're not talking like tent pole situations. We're just talking about, you heard a cool song in your car and that enlightened you, right? Happy Wednesday. I almost said Friday. Not yet. We're almost getting there. Attitude of life. So focusing on action, what you can do. So the things that you can fix, you do try and fix. So if you are tired, maybe take a nap, or you take a break, or you focus on your self-care. You actually do self-care. You don't just talk about it conceptually. It be something you actually do. You talk to friends. You spend time with your loved ones. You pet the dog. The dog is here. Pet her. It will make you happy. I trust you. Emotional awareness. So thinking about what we internally need. Are you having a bad day because you're just having a bad day? Okay, that's all right. Have that bad day. Own that bad day. But the next day, you kick ass and you make sure that it's not a bad week, right? Because we can have a bad day. It's one day. One day out of 365 days, right? Hopefully more if you're not just living a year, but living a year to year. But ideally, it's just one day. So have that bad day, have that bad moment, have that bad hour, but then build that bridge and get over it. Control of self. Your response to circumstances. So, could we be frustrated that every time we turn around something changes? Sure. Could we learn to live with the change and just know that it's a process? That's the better way, right? That's probably the more healthy way. And that's what's really going to make you be amenable to change and be a resilient person and help your patients to be a resilient person. Helping to control their circumstances. So, okay, yeah, where you live, you don't like it? Okay, great. You don't like who you're living with? Your patients, like whoever's in your house, whatever? I understand, I get it. What can you do? What is your role in making it better? These are things you can say to the patient. How can you change your circumstances? And the answer can't be, well, I could leave this place. Well, you could, but then what's going to happen there? You know, we have to look at how to make someone feel better and get better and think through their problems. A lot of times, I think our patients are used to people just doing for them. Well, let me fix this for you. Maybe making them fix some of their own stuff. It's how we can help them build resilience. It's how we build resilience. Social support. Network of friends and family. All those people that you follow on Snapchat. Those are the folks, right? You send them a picture with the thing in your hair or the weird dog face. Those are your people because they laugh back at you. So utilizing them and coming to them. Letting them know when you're struggling, not just when you're having a good day. Or vice versa. Letting them know when you're having a good day and not just struggling. There are some of those people too, right? You only hear from them when they're having a terrible time. You're like, oh my God. I'm not your therapist. So it's important that you use them in both ways. And that you teach your patients to use them in both ways, right? You know, ideally your patients shouldn't just come to maybe mom or dad or wife for money or for cigarettes or for this or for that. You should be telling them how they're doing, what they're experiencing, positive days, negative days, struggles, what they miss, what they don't miss, you know, all of these things. You can work with patients to help to hopefully do that and use that. Sense of humor. That's me. I am totally about using my sense of humor and using sort of like my props. So my prop is I've got a dog in a wagon. You know, so I totally use that to my advantage. I think I was saying to somebody, my presentation today is going to be, I'm going to bring this dog in, I'm going to introduce her, and everyone's going to come up one by one and pet her. And that's all I'm going to do. Yeah. So this is a way to really interact. Plus it ideally makes someone a little bit more personal, right? You know, I haven't met all of you, but it's more likely that you might come up to me now and be like, hey, can I pet your dog? Because that's always what nobody wants to come meet me. They want to pet the dog. That's fine. But so that's a common way to really get to people, begin to build a dialogue, build a relationship, and help to connect one another, right? You know, nobody doesn't like to laugh. If they don't, bring them to me. Pet the dog, and I'll tell them some dumb jokes, okay? Tell them the nice baby one. People will like that. Self-belief. Confident and have highest self-esteem. So sometimes we have patients that already have sort of high self-esteem. Maybe it's ill-gotten. So using that, you know, okay, well, great. You already believe in yourself, but still you're struggling. So let's see if we can combine those things together. You know, looking at how, or trying to maybe challenge them, not because we want to, you know, hit back or dampen that self-esteem, but we want to help them see where they could work on a specific area, right? How they can help to improve so that maybe their high self-esteem doesn't trample all over everybody else's, yeah? The ability to problem solve. So thinking. I think that oftentimes with this population, and I believe I said it before, but I'm going to say it again, is that people, they're so used to people doing everything for them. They don't have to do anything. You know, even when they come here, it's like, you just rest here and detox. We got this. We're going to talk to you. We're going to take this pill. We're going to give it to you already. You don't have to do anything. You can just swallow it. The only thing we don't do is like spoon feed them sometimes when they first get here. So hopefully as they work through treatment, we give them a little bit more autonomy. Ideally, that's how the phase process is built. It's meant to, like you gotta crawl before you walk. And we have to start letting them solve their own problems and think about things, and not letting them, or calling them on when they do this, let a family member rescue them, or let someone else rescue them, or let you guys rescue them. It's really important that you realize they gotta work through it themselves, When they leave, part of you is, you think of like the angel and the devil in like milk commercials. You want to be the angel, or at least maybe the little voice in their head that says, you shouldn't probably do that. Maybe you should think about that before you do it. What you don't want to be is the voice in the phone when they're calling you, asking you, can I do this? Should I do this? At all levels. Like there needs to be a break. They need to be able to at some point internalize you. That's a resilience building process. It's being able to develop those skills. Also learning how to be flexible. Nothing in the world, and I'll use California as an example, all the buildings here are built on wheels so that they can sway. That's so that they're movable, because we have to be able to be movable. We can't just sort of stick our feet in the sand and be like, nope, that's what it is, period, exclamation point, I'm not doing anything else, right? Because where does that get us? Usually at some point someone breaks. Next, how do we develop resilience? Well, hey, guess what? We do the same thing. You can do all that stuff that I just told you about as therapists in your own life. And I think that when you are someone who builds resilience and can be someone who's internally resilient, it spreads around you. I like to think of it as like the drop of water. Everyone, I don't think I put it on here, but they have the drop of water picture where it's reverberating out. I think that's true. So if you are the change, that it's going to reverberate out to other things, to other places. So if I'm going to sit by Sam and I'm cheery, ideally he won't kill me because I'm like crazy cheerful. And he starts to maybe also embody that cheerfulness. It doesn't have to be, on a huge level, but I think that we often get into patterns. This is why I think sometimes we get into negative patterns like mean girl processes, where people tend to go towards being kind of catty. I think it's, sometimes they find a group and whoever's the worst one, they start to one-up each other. So in the same way, you can do that positively, one-up each other positively, right? So you can change what you do. Well, I don't know if you say we're near each other, but wherever you are, you have an effect on each other. That's the whole idea of organizational culture. So if as a culture, organizationally resilient, or as a team you're resilient, that builds and it expounds upon one another, and then it becomes a really great thing. It actually also makes you a really good team. So some of the things, this is the 4 focuses, and I don't actually mention this in the self-care PowerPoint that I'm doing later, but I think that it does coincide with this. So physical resilience, so obviously fitness, nutrition, rest and recovery. Emotional resilience, so calm and focusing, impulse control, how to maybe stop something from coming out of your mouth that shouldn't. Yes. Emotional regulation, how to stop a reaction. We have to do that every day, right? There's sometimes patients tell us something and we're like, whoa, what? Did you repeat that? I say it in this recorder. Okay. So, there are instances we have to school ourselves. We have to school expressions. We have to school reactions. So that's part of how we do work on that. That's part of how we become resilient. Positive emotion, realistic optimism. So obviously, we can't be like, when you get out of here, it's going to be great. You're going to get the best job ever, and you're going to, everything's going to be fine, you're not ever going to use this again, and it's going to be fantastic. That's not realistic. That's like not real for most people, Okay, when you get out, you're probably going to be tempted. You might even relapse, but if you do, here's some coping stuff that you're going to put into play. Here's your plan that you're going to work on. Here's how your family's going to support you. here's what you can do in case that happens and you get too far in where you're needing assistance again, right? That's a lot more realistic than you're gonna get the best job ever and you're gonna win the lotto and everything's going to be amazing, right? Spiritual. Now, I like to use the word spiritual rather than religious because we want to talk about like values and beliefs. So how do people sort of conceptualize for themselves? What do they, internally believe? What are their values? What is their value system? So helping people to understand that and understanding that real resilience is a really big accompaniment to people's values and how they see things. At least for the case of my dissertation and the people that I interviewed, in all instances, there was some mention of God or some mention of a spiritual being. Now, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a religion or a specific religion, just some belief in something, that something could get better or that something is looking out for us, whatever the situation may be. And you can apply it in whatever religious lens, not religious, spiritual lens that you use. And you can encourage your patients to also apply it in whatever spiritual lens they use. Because, they don't believe in anything. Well, that's still a belief system, right? So we have something to work with. Reaching out and empathy, well, that's part of what we do on a regular basis, is to have empathy to help sort of reach the patient and get them thinking about themselves and their situation and how to get them to start changing those behaviors and their situation. So talking about this is really important. Mental self-belief. So I think, the whole idea of faking it till you make it is a big piece. It's definitely a big piece for any people that are new clinicians, First time you go in a room with somebody, you don't know what you're doing. That's okay. That's okay, right? We've all been in that situation. We've all had that experience. Nobody came in knowing everything, and that's what we're there for. But we believe that we can be helpful, and we have confidence that we'll be able to learn what we need to learn, right? Outlook and perspective, so that's, like I said, being positive. I like to tell people that my blood type is be positive. Also a dumb joke. It's so lame, but that's okay. But it's also my perspective. I am a much more positive and sort of outgoing, gregarious person. So it works for me. It only works if you have B positive blood. If you have A positive, you could be like, well, I'm a positive person. Whatever you're gonna work. Thinking traps. So not getting caught in, that sort of negative spell. We can all do it. Have a day of it. Have an hour of it. Get out of it, right? Get out of that trap. Just like for any of you guys who play golf, nobody wants to be stuck in the sand for too long, right? You work really hard to get out of it. Think of thinking traps in the same way. Like, we don't want to spend any time there. Sustained focus. So paying some attention, paying some very specific attention, spending specific time on working on yourself. So in whatever way you need to do that. I think that's part of self-care for me. Causal analysis. So looking at it from an outside perspective, I also think that it's useful to ask others, maybe how you're perceived. If you're thinking you're not sure if you're a resilient person, you're not sure how you're perceived, ask a friend, ask a foe, ask somebody just to kind of get some perspective, right? And then control controllables. I think that's really important. Know what you are in control and what you aren't in control of. You aren't in control of a lot of things that happen here, for example. You aren't in control of who's going to necessarily be assigned to you. But you can make your way through it, right? This is what I got to do today. Great. So it's all about how we sort of conceptualize and perceive things that look insurmountable, but they maybe don't always, especially if you have somebody to help you along with that. Right? Last is handouts. Okay, so I gave you guys some handouts that you can be using either in your regular practice or at home, or put up on your wall in your office, or whatever you want to do. So the first one I'm going to use is 7 Secrets to Resilience. That's this one. And it kind of just takes, it's got, first of all, I'm a big quote person. I like those. Like I said, build a bridge and get over it. Somebody wrote that. That's great. But this gives you some interesting quotes that you can utilize, just internally to maybe help have a good day. People often get those like positive calendars, like just for today, or those really good, meaningful things. Sure, you can do that, but the internet's full of stuff too. Save your money and go on the internet. Or you can just look at this. 7 days, so you pick one every day. Voila. The next one is Reflections on Resilience. So this one begins with, and it goes through, begins with beliefs, is a process, not a trait. I think that's important. It's a process, so that means that it's something that's developed, right? A trait is something that we just normally have. Like brown eyes, it's a trait. I can't change it. They're brown. That's it. Done. Process, you can change it. You mold it. Build it. Everyone, regardless of age, circumstances, has the capacity. That is true. Everyone can do it. Everyone. The three major factors that help us mitigate adversity. And, start slow with them. With patients or even internally, if you think it's something you struggle with, have them talk about the little things where they have maybe improved upon things. Even getting here was a step in the resilient direction, right? So that's maybe the first place that we start with our patients. Resilient isn't just having people, isn't just for people from high-risk environments. So it's not, it's for everybody. It's for you, me, for everybody. It isn't a program or curriculum. You'll notice that's why there's no group called Resilience. It's just a way of being. And then it goes on. I like the last one is, most people make it despite exposure to severe risk. So, for the most part, we're all making it through. It's not like everything is so dire like some people say. We all work through things, and as long as we're working through them together, that's where I think we make a lot of positive steps. The last one is 10 best phrases to teach resilience to your kids. Like I said, you can use this for kids, but I actually think some of it applies to patients in some cases, or even ourselves. I particularly like 3, let's take a break. Or, who have you spoken to about this? Or, you could be right, but have you thought about this? You know what I mean? So, they're kind of like some sentence stems to help work through things with people. And like I said, it could be for kids, but it could also be for, most everybody. So that is all I have to say about resilience. Does anybody have any questions? Questions, comments, concerns? Hopes, dreams, aspirations. Yes.
Is there a daily practice that you do to help maintain your resilience?
Honestly, no. There certainly could be. If I was gonna say anything, it's not in the morning. It would be music. I'm really big music. I love concerts. I always have music on, or I usually have it in. So between my dogs and probably music, or incorporating music in some way into my life every day, even in the shower, I have a little music thing, and I can change songs. So it's a big deal for me. So that's what I would say. But I also, I think I'm one of those. I was a product of kind of a resilient family. Came from a family that people just sort of dealt with it, whatever the situation was. So, for example, the last year I've spent taking care of my sick mother. It was relatively hard, but I worked at the same time. And she died, and that's okay, because people die. And it's sort of just being able to work through on a daily basis, you know what I mean? Sort of okay, well, this is what got thrown at me, I just have to deal with it. There were so many people that said to me, why are you not putting that dog down? she has to go. I'm like, no, I love her. So, you know, my thought is if as long as she doesn't hurt, as long as she has a good life, I can carry her around and help her pee. That's not a big deal, right? So it's all in what we feel like we can handle, and it's what I think we look at on a daily basis. Like, okay, because before she had the surgery, I was like, what's this gonna look like? I don't really know. How many gonna want me to bring her to work? Like, it was like a whole thing, right? And I think sometimes being pushed into it is what gets things done, right? It sort of tells us where we are and how well we can do, or you know, how we can do to just sort of like survive something or get through it, right? So I didn't know how I was going to deal with her until I was actually dealing with her, and then I was dealing with her and it was done. So I think that sometimes, I think we let fear sometimes get in the way of things that we could be doing and forgetting how malleable we really are, right? So, yeah. Other questions?